West Florida Public Library presents Explore Pensacola History, a lecture series highlighting more than 450 years of Escambia County's history. Join us as we explore the people, places, and events that make up our area's unique heritage. Major funding for Explore Pensacola History was provided through a grant from the Florida Humanities Council with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording do not necessarily represent those of the Florida Humanities Council or the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding was provided by the Friends of West Florida Public Library, whose ongoing generosity provides these and other first-class programs to the people of Escambia County. For more information or to become a friend of the library, visit them online at friendsofwfpl.org.
Thank you, Mike. Wow, we got a packed house. Yes, thank you for coming. I think most of you in this room have already heard this, but even Margot Stringfield is here, who did half of this. But it is my pleasure to kick off the lecture series. As most of you know who know me, I have always thought that part of our responsibility as academicians and the educated people in our society to give back and share what we know, what we discover, what we find with the people who pay for it, the citizens of our country and certainly locally. I grew up and matured in the 60s. I was in college in the 60s, and one of the things I came out of the 60s with was to try to make my life relevant, that I could answer the question of so what after my life was over and during my lifetime. And I don't know why, but that stuck with me, and I've never been an ivory tower type. I don't fit in an ivory tower, and I was very uncomfortable in them, and so I really did walk on to the University of West Florida with a big contract. I had my own money, which is why they said yes. And I had to produce my own money for a long time, but that was okay. I knew that going in, but it has been a wonderful place for me to be. But I want to show you a little bit today. I'm going to give you an overview of the history of Pensacola with broad brushes and kind of set up a little bit for the lectures that you have to come. Some will be specific, like Margot Stringfield on St. Michael's. Some will be more broad on shipwrecks, for example. But I thought I'd sort of just throw an umbrella over all of these lectures and to give a background for you and to show you the large picture, and then they will show you the more narrow and specialized pictures in much more detail. And I don't usually give archaeology talks anymore. It's been 6 years since I was on a site, but I haven't forgotten everything. Everybody tells me I did write the book, so why don't I give a talk every time I turn around? But I've been hesitant because I don't practice anymore. But I knew that going into being president. I knew I'd have to give it up. You can't do both. But I do have a little bit here for you to at least set you up. The first thing I wanted to show you was just an overview of the historical periods. Although this is historical history oriented, I wanted you not to forget about the Native Americans that were here, the indigenous natives that were called Pensacola home far longer than any European descent or any other person from any other area of the world called it home. We call them the Pensacola Indians. We actually do not know their name. I will get into their story a little bit, but they basically disappeared the native ones disappeared before Luna arrived in 1559. There were no Native Americans here. The reason is previous expeditions, my theory is that previous expeditions had arrived here in 1539 and 1528, and they had accidentally infected our indigenous native Pensacola Indians, and they were gone. The Indians in Mobile lasted until the 18th century, into the 1700s, but our Pensacola Indians and many of the Florida Indians that were visited first by Europeans were not immune to any of the European diseases. They had been isolated for 12 to 15,000 years and never caught a cold, never had the flu, never had the measles, never had the mumps, never had smallpox, never had anything. And so measles and mumps are childhood diseases that we get and survive because we inherited antibodies, and we are the descendants of the survivors of the great plagues of Europe and Africa. We are the most immune people on the planet. And we encountered the most vulnerable people on the planet, the Native Americans in North and South America. And that was the big killer of the native populations. 90% would die within 20 years of contact. And it isn't because we caused them or wanted them to catch our diseases. We couldn't help it. And on all the early expeditions, like on every expedition, there are people who have colds and people who have the flu and people who have the measles if they're children. So that's really what happened to them. Indians came in, and I'll tell you that story a little bit later. They came in later, but by 1559, when Luna arrived, it was vacant. And that was one of his problems, because as you know, the ship's wrecked in a hurricane, which I hope we don't have another one of, but we've been having hurricanes for at least 6,000 years, not any longer than that. And it ruined his food. The people survived. Nobody was killed. They were in shallow water. They went onto the land, but all of their food was stored on the ships, and so they were basically in very serious trouble. So they had no Indians to get to help them or to force to help them, and they tried to find the ones that previous expeditions had found in Alabama. They were also dead because they had died of diseases after DeSoto moved on, and 20 years ahead of that. And actually, Pensacola was abandoned. The Luna expedition was the biggest, the best government-supported settlement attempt in all of Spanish colonial history. After that, they said, forget it. We are not going to launch another one like this ever again. We are going to have people leading them who have skin in the game. And so the government would only give them a contract. The people like Menendez, who went to settle St. Augustine in 1565, he was rich, he wanted to make money, he got a good deal, half the profits, the exclusive trade with the Indians, and he had to come up with upfront money. So our Luna expedition was the end of the great government-supported expeditions. They didn't come back until 1698, and in 1698 the only reason they came back to Pensacola was because of the French. La Salle had discovered the mouth of the Mississippi River in 1687 and had split Spanish holdings in North America that ran from Mexico all the way to St. Augustine, split it down the Mississippi River, which became French. And the Spanish were worried that the French were going to take Spanish Florida on the east and take what came to be Spanish Texas or northern Mexico and get to their gold and silver mines over there. And they would jeopardize St. Augustine, which was where all the gold fleets and silver fleets took off to go back to Spain. So they founded Presidio Santa Maria, which is over on the Naval Air Station, and another similar one on to the west of the Mississippi called Presidio Los Adais. It's in Arkansas, in Natchitoches, Arkansas. They were both very successful. Texas did not turn French, nor did Florida. And so the reason we have a Spanish history and Mobile has a French colonial history is because of that settlement in 1698, Santa Maria de Galvez. And we studied that. In 1998, we had the 300th anniversary of Pensacola, and it was a wonderful site. It was right after the Cold War, and it was a town, all the military bases were trying to open their arms and do technology exchange and get the public back on their site, their property. After 9/11, they closed again, but for that little window of time, 1994 to 1998, they were very open and supportive. So at any rate, we discovered, of course, I don't read Spanish, and I kind of backed into historical archaeology, but I hire people who read Spanish for me, and always have, always will, and I kind of expected that this Santa Maria out at the base was a typical fort, and a settlement attempt, and had Mom, Pop, and the kids, and they planned to stay here and found Pensacola. Well, what I found is that it was a penal colony. There were no Indians here yet, even after 150 years or so, and they knew there were no Indians, so they brought their own labor force, which were the prisoners from Mexico City, Puebla, and Veracruz. And they sentenced them to Pensacola. We still sentence prisoners and criminals to work for the government, your choice of go to prison or go to work, and they chose to go to work up here. And they expected to go home. They never expected to stay. It was all men. Their families were back in Mexico, living in the poorer parts of Veracruz, Puebla, and Mexico City. And when they asked me to be interim president, I had followed these people back to Mexico and was in Veracruz, and I found just wonderful things there that connected our people to them. And I saw them at home instead of as prisoners. But it was a fascinating experience. What we found in the archaeological record is very different than what we would have interpreted in the historical records. They were poor, they were underfed, they were underclothed, they were sick. And on the other hand, when you look at what we found archaeologically, it was a great big fort. The buildings were huge. It looked like they were just fine. And it was a classic example of combining of the historical documents and the archaeological record together to provide a full picture of what life was like back then in the late 1600s. So this is where Pensacola starts counting, 1698. Now I know we're celebrating the 500th anniversary of Ponce de Leon. We just celebrated the 450th anniversary of Tristan da Luna, and so on and on and on it goes. And we love anniversaries in our society, and so do I. They fund a lot of good projects and lecture series like this. This has to do with Florida's 500th anniversary to make people aware of Florida's long history, because when you talk to somebody in North Dakota or Montana or Seattle, they think we are a post-World War II state. They think Disney World, they think all the attractions, and they think of all the settlement in Miami, and they do not know that we were first. And one of the very important things that I have found is that while the sailing ships of exploration reached us, not first, but pretty much to the first, we also are known for our space exploration, where we send ships of the air into space. And it's very fitting. I have some interesting slides that I'm not going to bore you with, but picture in your mind the old colonial ships, Columbus, if you will, and the early explorers, and then think of the space shuttle and capsules that land on the moon or Mars or any darn where else we want to go. It's in our cultural DNA to see what's out there. It is not in the cultural DNA of all societies. China has been around for 1,000 years with sailing ships and navigational aids, and it didn't ever cross their mind to see what was on the other side of the Pacific. They were an inward-looking culture and still are. Ours is an outward-looking culture. Part of it is religion, part of it is our capitalism, part of it is just our history. So at any rate, Santa Maria is it. It turned French. The French conquered Santa Maria. They burned it to the ground in 1719, and they were only here for 3 years. There were a lot of European wars played out here in the colonies, and the French and the Spanish turned on each other at the last minute, and they stayed, but they only sent a small group of people over from Mobile, French soldiers that were stationed here for 3 years. But that's one of our 5 flags. It's a French flag, and we have very little actually in our culture today from that particular French period. And then the Spanish came back in 1722, and they didn't want to be on land because they were very vulnerable on the land to attack. So they went out to the tip of Santa Rosa Island near Fort Pickens, just about half a mile to the east, and we found that site. And my old professor had found that site 50 years ago, and I saw the pictures, and it's just beach sand, and it's very tender, very fragile site. And I wanted to put that, working on that site, off until I was really, had a lot of experience and knew what to look for, and had a stronger team. And so we went there in 2004 and dug there for 4 seasons. Just before Hurricane Ivan, we closed up. No, we ended in 2004, and that was Ivan, so we started in 2000. And then the third site, when they came back, they were blown off the island. They had 8 hurricanes in 30 years. And you don't get more vulnerable than what we call the beach. And so they said, all right, where are we going to go? So they decided to come back to the land, and they came to downtown Pensacola. And founded Fort San Miguel, which is like, the T.T. Wentworth is right in the middle of it, to give you some geography. Seville Square and Ferdinand Plaza were the borders of the forts. There were several forts there, Spanish, British, then second Spanish, but they all were right there. And it was basically demilitarized by about the 1760s. So on the other hand, what happened to the Spanish? And the answer is the British came in and kicked them out and overwhelmed them. And they lost it based on a treaty, but they all forced the Spanish out. The British forced the Spanish out at the point of a gun. Every Catholic and every every Catholic and every Spaniard had to go. And they brought the boats to what is now Palafox Pier and loaded them up and sent them to, first they sent them to France. And that didn't work. They commandeered the boat and turned it around, and they came back. Well, that didn't work, so they sent them back again. This time they sent them to Cuba and to Veracruz, Mexico. And so at any rate, they got rid of them. And it was very British. Very British. It was the capital of the colony of West Florida. St. Augustine was the capital of the colony of East Florida. So there were actually 15 colonies, and 13 revolted. All right, that became the United States eventually. But the colony of West Florida and the colony of East Florida did not revolt. They were British throughout the American Revolution, and they were our enemy of the 13, the new United States. And so George Washington had made a deal with Spain. He said, look, I hate the British. I can't fight on 2 fronts. We're very busy and not doing well on the Atlantic. And if you, King of Spain, would send a general and run the British out of the 2 British colonies, East and West Florida, you can have it. In comes Galvez. Galvez says, I'll take it. And he takes it lickety-split. And the West Florida went all the way to Louisiana, to New Orleans at this time. And so he comes and he takes Mobile, the Battle of all that. And he took Mobile, they took New Orleans, they took Pensacola, and they took St. Augustine, and it was Spanish again for another 20 years. We call that the Second Spanish period. And so Galvez is their hero, Galvez is our hero, and it's one of the least known stories of our involvement and Spain's involvement and support of the American Revolution for independence. I know that, and one of the things that the Spanish like about it is that I say that. I say thank you, I say that I tell people the real truth, and when the Spanish come here, when the King and Queen came here, which was a big deal, they came here for our 300th anniversary. I don't know which anniversary it was. Anyway, they came here. 450th, that's what it was. And St. Augustine was all miffed because they couldn't get the King and Queen over there, and we got them over here, but they'd had them before. And I said, well, don't you want to see the Luna shipwreck and talk about Luna and see all the stuff? And they said, no, actually. No, we would like to go see where Galvez had the Battle of Pensacola. And I thought, oh my God, we haven't done any work on that site. But they had a bust, it's up here at Fort George. They had a bust of Galvez and they laid wreaths there. That's where we did the thing. And so to Spain, Luna is a failure. And he was, he failed. Mother Nature did it to him. And Galvez is a hero, because he conquered the nasty Brits and drove them out, and it was a great ally, early ally of the United States and George Washington. So that's kind of one of the roles that we play in the history of the United States. We could not have done it without him because what the British were doing in fighting the American rebels is that they were using East and West Florida as a staging ground. And they were sending mercenaries, mainly mercenaries from Germany in particular. They were sending them here and gathering them up and practicing and then sending them into battle in Alabama, Georgia, and points north. So we find a lot during this particular period, the British period. We find a lot of German artifacts and German weapons because there were a lot of them here. And also we find a lot of British military material here. But not after the Galvez came through. And during the second Spanish period, it was different. It was very different. And many of the people, the old Spanish families in Pensacola, like the Quinas, are related to that particular period. It was really a multicultural place by that time in the 1780s and to 1820s. There were people from all over. They were speaking all kinds of languages in the street. It was a little bit poorer than it had been before under the British or the first Spanish, and they demilitarized downtown, and they began to put all of their military efforts in North Hill. North Hill has 3 forts. Fort George is one, and there are 2 others. So they also built a huge fort and kept expanding it out at Fort Barrancas. And so that the downtown Pensacola became demilitarized, and they sold it off in lots. And so many of those lots go back to today, downtown, go back to the second Spanish period. And the British had to sign papers and turn over all the land, and it was an interesting time. And of course, one of the things that, for better or for worse, Americans are very hard to keep out of anywhere. And they didn't come in the front door like in the port or downtown where the forts were. They didn't come in the pass where the Spanish forts were. They came in the back door. They came in through Jay and Chumucla and Bonifay, and they came in down the rivers from the Carolinas and from Georgia. And so they really just squatted. And the Spanish weren't strong enough to keep them out. And finally, when Andrew Jackson was a big general, he was chasing Indians, he was chasing anybody who wasn't an American, out, out, out. And so finally the Spanish gave up and said, "Wouldn't you like to buy it?" And Andrew Jackson said, "Yes, we would." And so they bought Spanish Florida, what was left of Spanish Florida, and they have never returned to own it. So it's been American since 1821. You pretty well know American history. The next big deal was the Civil War. Then comes the lumber boom, which built North Hill and East Hill and led to the Pensacola that we know with the Naval Air Station and all of that today. So that's kind of a big, probably too windy overview of the historical periods in Pensacola. And there's lots of details, lots of history and archaeology that all of us have studied at the University of West Florida, the history department, as well as the anthropology and archaeology department and the Archaeology Institute. But this is so now you've got sort of the general context and the flow of things. I wanted to now talk to you a little bit about the kinds of sites and resources that we do have, and it's really what is special about Pensacola's history and archaeology. First of all, we're not limited to sites on land, on terrestrial types of archaeology that everyone thinks you have a dig and you dig dirt and all of that. Well, we do, and that's all I was doing. And then one day over on Dead Man's Island, and I was just there on a tour this weekend, over on Dead Man's Island, we were doing a survey for the city of Gulf Breeze's 25th anniversary, which turned out to be a joke. Gulf Breeze has been a colonial shipyard since the 1600s. But at any rate, we didn't know that. And we were surveying Dead Man's Island and finding all the stuff from the fertilizer plant and the shipyard, from the snapper fleet, and a waterspout came up. And a waterspout, I mean, we have them this time of year. And the next day we came back and we saw some young boys, early young teenagers, with their little skiff, and they were diving down and bringing up stuff. And we had a 14-year-old boy with us. And we said, "Why don't you go find out what they're doing? Because they're not going to talk to me." So he goes over there, and he, one guy to another, and they were on a shipwreck. And our boy came over and said they're on a shipwreck. And I said, no way, they're not in a shipwreck. Of course, it's called Old Navy Cove. That should have told me it was a clue. But at any rate, make a long story short, it was a shipwreck. It was a British gunboat. I called the state underwater archaeologist, Roger Smith, who is still our state underwater archaeologist. He came over, they did a field school on it, and he said, Judy, the whole place is littered with wrecks. I said, why? And he points to the pass. He says, that's the only deep water pass between New Orleans and Tampa. I said, well, I guess you're right. I know I'm right. And that's why you have a colonial history and Fort Walton doesn't. That's why you have an earlier colonial history than Mobile, because it's harder to get in, because Mobile, Goodland, is 30 miles away from the pass. That's why Panama City doesn't have a colonial. I said, oh, okay, I get it. He said, now I want to take you in a boat and I want you to look at Pensacola from the water with your colonial period hat on. And it's gorgeous. There's high land next to the water. There's fresh water everywhere. The library right in Spring Street. The reason it's named Spring Street is there was the clearest water in Pensacola ran right down this street, and there's still old, what do you call them, funnels, chutes, where they, in the street, where they channeled it out to the bay where people could, they're called Washerwoman's Creek too, because the water was so pure. I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, it just goes on and on. Anyway, so we have a lot of shipwrecks. And Roger said, well, Judy, I want to look for Luna shipwrecks. I said, Roger, don't even think about it. You're going to get everybody excited and you're not going to find them. He had looked for Christopher Columbus shipwrecks in Jamaica and had not found them. I said, don't do it twice. He drank all my scotch. I stayed up night after night with him, and he did not listen to me. He launched his survey. I said, well, we'll help you, of course, but let's keep it on the down low a little bit. And he did. And so it was just a survey. I said, just call it a survey of shipwrecks of Pensacola Bay. And so he did. And then he just dragging this little borrowed metal detector around underwater. So then he finds it. And he finds some, anomalies, the readings on the metal detector. And he says, well, where you would expect to find shipwrecks of Lunas is, and actually most shipwrecks are on sandbars that are at the mouth of the bayous, because they're trying to get up the bayou to get shelter, and they run aground on the sandbars that are at the mouth of every bayou. I said, oh, that's pretty smart. And it's a good boat launch over there at 17th Avenue boat launch. And he said, well, we'll start at the one at the mouth of Bayou Tahar. And I said, all right. And you know the rest of the story. He found it. I said, how did you find it? He said, wasn't that hard. And, they drove him nuts, And then we did a survey. There are over 400 shipwrecks in Pensacola Bay. Some are shrimp boats, some are pizza ovens, some are Volkswagens, but I mean, there are a lot of them out there. And so it's just been an absolutely wonderful addition. And underwater archaeology was bad. It had a bad reputation. That's when the Atocha was being looted. It's when Mel Fisher was in his heyday. And what treasure hunters do is they go after the treasure, and then they turn that into money. And that is their number one and only goal. That is not the goal of archaeologists. And we do not have any GOLD in Pensacola on our shipwrecks. We have some copper coins, and that's all. But at any rate, we have the right kind of shipwrecks. We have the right kind of terrestrial sites. It is just a wonderful, the kind of resources that we have. And I really knew that regardless of whether I had a salary or not, it took me about 8 years to get a real paycheck, a steady paycheck. It really wasn't a big deal because the sites were so good and I could get funding for them. We had volunteers that were really the heart and soul of Pensacola. Many of the original students and volunteers are in this room. Another thing we have is archaeological material as well as good historical documents. Pensacola has been taking care of its historical documents for a long time. That was one of the big missions of the University of West Florida, was to focus its history, on its collections, on West Florida. And Jim Surveys, our first librarian, was doggedly obsessive about that. And our special collections are incredible. And one of the psychological things behind that is nobody cares about Northwest Florida. Nobody does, but us. They do not care. They don't know what time it is here. They don't. And they don't care. And they think Florida is Orlando and Disney World and whatever, and all the history is in St. Augustine. And that's not true. So the only way we're going to have anything done is basically to do it ourselves. And we're that kind of people. We have that kind of psychology. And that's okay. I mean, we gripe about it every once in a while, but you still have to do it. And so they've been very, very proud of our long history. We've had the forts, we have a good time, and I came over here as a kid to Fort Pickens, and like everybody, half the people in the room did when they were 10, looking for the ghosts in the tunnels of Fort Pickens, you know, and having a good time. But at any rate, taking care of ourselves and our stuff. And we don't want anybody else to come in and rip it off and take it to Boston or take it to New York or take it much farther than Tallahassee. So we also have good preservation. We have military and civilian. Not every community does. These old forts are very rare, and they're still here with us, and we can prove it. There are also wonderful civilian resources, and the houses and the structures and the recreational areas of all of these periods that I just described are still with us, and the town is not. I picked Pensacola because I had a good idea this was true, but number two, development in Pensacola has always been kind of not as fast and furious as it was elsewhere in the state. And so I didn't want to spend my life doing rescue archaeology in Miami or Orlando or Tampa. That does not appeal to me at all, and my hat is off to those people that do. I wanted the good stuff. I'm very selfish. You have one life. A lot of my family died very young and very suddenly, and you don't know when you're going to go, and I wanted to be with the good stuff as long as I could. And I'm still here, so I'm good. The preservation is exquisite. I mean, you can reach down and touch Luna's ship. You can drive a nail into those timbers that are below the bay bottom. You can find things on land that you only read about in textbooks. It is untouched. And it's kind of like, in a way, being a physician in a town that has the normal run of sicknesses, and you can help them. You can really help the archaeological record. You can appreciate it. And so when people like me and teams that I've been able to build finally get solid funding, we're doing fine. But when you bring in people who understand this and appreciate it for its value, not in dollars, but in terms of its condition, in terms of its information, in terms of its variety. There are endless master's programs and doctoral theses waiting to be written. And that really led to a strong archaeology program. People really, and people wonder why I did public archaeology. And I was one of the kind of inventors or developers of it. And one of the reasons is I always believed in sharing things with the public, but I didn't have any money. I needed help. And in fact, I was telling somebody today, on the first project I did for the city of Pensacola was to survey all the city-owned property and for archaeological sites. And I was at city council meeting for the first time, dressed completely inappropriately. And they asked me, they said, yes, we would like to do a survey. And I said, good. They said, well, how much? I had no clue. I'd just come off a multi-million-dollar project, and I realized then, what could I get? I figured they had $10,000. I said, sure, $10,000. They said, sold. And the next morning I woke up and I had really buyer's remorse. And how in the world am I going to do this? Because when you're young and you blow it, you blow up for the rest of your career. And so much more is on the line. People ask me if being president is the hardest job I ever had. I say, absolutely not. I have got more support and more money and than I've ever had in my life for anything. Back in the day is when you lay it all on the line. And at any rate, so I thought, well, what am I going to do? And so I thought that there are a lot of people in Pensacola that are healthy and intelligent, that have time on their hands. They are the unemployed. So I put an ad in the classified ads, in the want ads. And I said, if you are unemployed, if you would like to, something to the effect, if you would like to spend your time in an interesting way, you can volunteer on the Pensacola Archaeological Survey. All you have to do is to dedicate a full day, not a half day, but a full day. And they call this number. And I thought, boy, this is the stupidest thing I ever heard of. But it worked like magic, and we had a full crew every day. My undergraduates helped in that, and were the little supervisors for them. And then I had a youth archaeology program because I didn't finish it, and I wanted to do some more. And we did that for a few years, and I found out the public is really helpful. The public is not hurtful. When I was educated back in the early 60s, I was told to don't talk to the public because they won't understand what you say. Don't talk to the press because that will endanger your sight. Don't talk to anybody but archaeologists because they won't appreciate what you're doing. Stay away. Stay only within the academy. And that was the thinking of the time. And when I began to realize that that was wrong is when I came to Pensacola. And it is wrong. Look at the house. Look at how many people want to know about their past. And one of the reasons I thought that might be true was how many people subscribed to National Geographic. This was before cable TV. But people read, as I did as a child, I read National Geographic, and I wanted to go to Egypt and dig up mummies. And I meant it. And my mom said, oh my God. Okay, you go right ahead, little farm girl from Panama City. And so I learned how to read hieroglyphics. I never looked back. I wanted to go. They didn't teach it at Florida State, but they taught American archaeology, which is where you can get a job. And but it was very elite. But the American public love archaeology. And so you're really already on second base when you talk archaeology to the general public. And I think it is part of our responsibility to do it. And I tell you, we put FSU out of business. They closed their program. We have 300 undergraduates. We have 175 graduate students. We supply most of a significant number of the professional archaeologists in the United States. With our master's program, there's a 95% employment in field of our master's program and 86% employment in field of our undergraduates. It's because, yeah, it's unbelievable. Right. And I'm going to tell you, there's two secrets to our success. Number one is drop dead archaeology. I mean, where are you going to do a field school on a 16th century shipwreck in this country? Nowhere. Number two, and terrestrial the same way. Number two is that I've always liked to dig. I love finding it. I love the field. I do all the other stuff that's harder, but I love to dig. And so why not do it continually? And that's what students like to do. And so they get to learn how to do it. Then they take it all the way to the lab, and then all the way to analysis, and all the way to writing it up, because that's what our product is the written record and artifacts that are curated, and some are put on display. So anyway, so it has, we have wonderful sites, and archaeology is a part of Pensacola, and that's why we get so many good students to want to come here, and professionals who want to work with us, because archaeology is appreciated. And that's not true in Tallahassee. It's not true in Mobile. It's not true in Orlando. It's not true in Boston. But it is true here. And that's one of the unique things. That's why we can have a plethora of lecturers to help Mike and the library here have a wonderful lecture series. It's that easy. I think we have 9 archaeologists now and counting. So anyway, it's a wonderful program. I wanted to give you, because this is one of my little axes to grind, this is a map of, I want to give you the skinny on founding of Florida. The earliest dot on this map is Ponce de Leon in 1513. And that's why we are celebrating in 2013 the 500th anniversary of the first settlement of Florida. I want to tell you that that is probably not true, but it is the first documented one. There were lots of undocumented slave raids, Indian slave raids here all along Florida from the Caribbean, where they had sugar plantations, and mainly sugar plantations early on, very wealthy, and they ruined the Indian population. So they ran out of labor, Indians, and so they would come up here and steal these. But you can see, and I have this long chart which I won't hand out, but you can see that Ponce de Leon was followed. He died actually down in Charlotte Harbor. Well, he died in Puerto Rico, but he was shot and mortally wounded in a settlement attempt in 1521. The 1513 was a sanctioned slave raid. He was supposed to only go to the Bahamas down there, but somehow he wound up near St. Augustine. And then Narvaez in 1528, that was a failure. Then we have De Soto in 1539. The thing that we come into play here in Pensacola is that De Soto's resupply team in 1539 and 40, he was supposed to come to Pensacola. He was supposed to come here. His whole fleet of resupply ships, they dropped him off in Tampa, they went down to Cuba, got all of their resupply fleet together and went up and anchored in our bay. Of course, De Soto never showed up because he didn't have anything, and Spanish don't like that, so he just took a left and went up north, and he, Maldonado is the resupply captain's name. In 1540 and 1541, he anchored there. Now, what is important to us, and we have not pursued this yet, is that I think he was the last ones to see the Pensacola Indians. I think his records would document what they looked like, what they did, who they were, and what their way of life was like. But we haven't searched for those records. I'm sure they exist. And then, of course, Luna comes in 1559. And, of course, everyone thinks the Luna is the first settlement attempt in Florida. It's not. It's the fourth. Then there were several others, but in 1565, Menendez comes in, and it really is a propped-up, state-supported settlement. But I wanted you to know that that's sort of the map of the explorations and settlement attempts in Florida. I also wanted to give you an idea, just an overview of where some of these sites that, these forts that I've talked to you about. The Luna fleet is at the mouth of Bayou Tahar. The next settlement was here, Presidio Santa Maria, and Fort Barrancas is here. Now, the reason that Presidio Santa Maria, I was afraid that Santa Maria was underneath Fort Barrancas and gone, or destroyed accidentally with all the rebuilding, but it wasn't. And that's because this island we have, it moves to the west as our sand flows from the east to the west along the bay. And in 1698, the mouth of the pass was there. And so it was directly aimed at the mouth of the pass to prevent the bad guys from coming in. And sure enough, they came in just a few months after they started in 1698. Then when they came back, after the French were here for a few years, they came back, and it's about a mile east of where Fort Pickens is, and that's because the island still hadn't grown far enough to the west. Then Fort San Miguel is actually downtown Pensacola, and that's the one that stuck. I just thought I'd give you a little overview. The colonial shipyard was here on this part of the Gulf Breeze Peninsula. It's very historic. There's lots of water there, and it is a very, very interesting place. That's Luna. And then I wanted to, this is a little a busy map, but I borrowed it from one of our archaeologists, John Worth, who is a wonderful Spanish colonial archaeologist and can sit and read these old documents from the 15th, 16th, 17th century like you and I read the newspaper. And he has given us great insight into what people thought, what people said, what people saw in great detail. So what he focuses on is the Indians in the historic period. And you see all these names, the Tawasas, San Jose de Escambay was a mission. The Yamasees were on the run from the British. What was happening in the 1700s is that the British were really very racist. They really didn't want anyone around them except Brits. They would do business with other people, but they were big on slavery. They were big on you and I would call it discrimination. And they would trade with the Indians, but the Indians wanted away from the British. And so they ran from the British to the Spanish, which had a much better attitude towards other people that were different than them. And so they came here. The Appalachians came here from Tallahassee. The Yamasees came here from South Carolina. These people, the Western, it's another mission, and they built missions. The Spanish would build missions for them, and I hadn't concentrated on that. You can tell I'd concentrated on the military, And this is getting to what I want to give you sort of a sneak preview. This one, where the dot came up, is San Jose to Escambay, and Dr. Worth went looking for that. This is just a diagram of where some of the Indians came from. The Indians that are here and that were here in the 1800s came from elsewhere. They're mainly Creeks. Their homeland is in Alabama and Georgia, but they were on the losing end of the British attacks, and so they would run to here. They also went to Texas. They went to the Mississippi River Valley as refugees. And since there were no native Indians here, it was open and for the taking. But it was a mixture of Indians. So when I say the Pensacola Indians are not here, I mean the indigenous Pensacola Indians. There are Indians here. They're alive and well and growing, and their culture is being appreciated more and more. But they are really from, their ancestors are from the Creek area. And I thought I'd just let you, a lot of people don't know that. John, of course, does. Also, we had, there was pressure. The British were coming down and attacking them, and they would attack these missions, and the Indians from San Jose to Escambay, and there was another on Garcon Point, San Antonio, they all ran into San Miguel in 1761. The British were attacking the Indians, and they also attacked Santa Maria, but they didn't get it. And they set up shop in Pensacola. Those of you who know where the Barclay House is, over on the east side of town, that was Indiantown. And that's a picture of it, from a drawing of it, from Pensacola Bay. This is where the Indians lived. This is what the area looked like before Bayfront Drive went in, before the wharfs, before the mills. This is in the 1760s. And it was... it didn't last too long, but it was there. And those Indians were the refugee Indians. They wouldn't let them live in the fort with them, but they could go into the fort for protection under attack. But they didn't bother them and let them live and traded with them, the Spanish did, in the fort. And so John went looking for one, and this is the latest, all right? I was asked to tell you a little bit of the latest kind of archaeology. This is a new kind of archaeology for us. Basically, it's mission archaeology. And so John went looking for it, and John, like Roger Smith, said, I'm going to find missions Escambay. I said, John, don't go looking for something. You're not going to find it. I gave him the same drill, and he didn't even drink my scotch. And I said, he said, oh, no, right where it is. I said, no, you don't. And he said, yeah, I'll find it. And he reads all the documents and studies all the maps, and he does the scale thing, and now we've got Google and we've got GIS. And about 9 months later, after I hired him, he said, Judy, I know right where it is. I said, no, you don't. You just think you know where it is. No, I'll bet you it's right at Durant's Bend, at a boat ramp, right there. I said, all right, take the field school out there, but you know, you could really be disappointed. You know the end of the story. Walk right to it, And I wanted to show you one of the best sites. That's, no, John's not in those pictures. It was covered with woods. It was right around the boat camp there at Durant's Bend, and they put in some test pits. And this is what a wall trench, a trench that was dug into the earth. That building wall was put on, and it's a short window of time in the 1760s, actually 1750s, that the buildings were there. And it is just a fantastic site. But the most important part about that site is look how shallow it is. This land has never been plowed. Never. By a mule, by a tractor, or by a garden plow. Luck. This is the luckiest archaeological place I have ever been in. I'm not going to say this is commonplace, but here in Pensacola, Luna shipwrecks, first place we looked. The forts, all three forts, are undisturbed. Right there where they were built. This mission is classic archaeology. This is Texas. How many places have you been on? How many pieces of land have you been on that's never been plowed? I thought he was kidding. By this time I was president, and I went out there and I said, I want to see it. I know there's some plow scars in the upper, and there aren't. And we asked the people why it did, and there was no answer why it had never been plowed. There was just no answer. It's just luck. He's getting famous. Look how shallow they are. This is not 10 feet down. This is not 2 feet. It's based barely a foot down. Burnt corn cobs. Just the right kind of corn from the 18th century. Trading with the Indians. There were Indians here as well as soldiers as well as churchmen. And they're finding a concentration of it here. This is what it looks like cleaned up, little corn cobs, and this is, they're being sent off for radiocarbon dates. And they're, of course, right on the money. All kinds of artifacts, Indian pottery, classic Appalachian pottery. They came over from St. Louis when the British burned them out in 1704, but they were over here before. Spanish pottery right out of the textbooks. Blue beads, necklace beads like mine, and mine are fake. And then a bale seal from trading with the French in Mobile. It is an incredible sight. We call it Mission Escambay. And I had to show you this. This is a straight razor from the mission, and it's what it looks like in the field. This is the in the ground. See the rust? That's the knife. And this is what it looks like when they x-rayed it. And this is what a modern example of a straight razor looks like. And folks, we're talking, 200-300 years ago. Laying there, 6 inches below the ground, never been collected, never been plowed. It is perfect. It's a 10. And now he's writing it up. That's what's the latest. And I thought, now they wanted me to tell you a little bit about me. Most of you know my story. When I came here in 1980, I was looking for a place where I could spread my wings. I came here from the University of Alabama. It's a great program, always has been, always will be. But it was like working for IBM, and you would do what you're told, and that's what you were supposed to do. And the only other woman in the archaeology program was the secretary. And that was not good. And they were not ready for a well-trained, brassy woman like I was when in my 30s. Now I'm much calmer. I'm much more diplomatic. I'm nicer. In my 30s, I wasn't. And at any rate, I did fine there. I did just what they told me to do. But I wanted a place with some more freedom. And I came here, and I wanted to go to a place that had no archaeological history. I didn't want anybody's baggage. I didn't want anybody's dirty laundry to clean up. I wanted to go there with good sites, and I wanted to do what I wanted to with them. And I came here with a big contract, and so they said, that's fine. And so we've done, historical archaeology was just beginning to come into its own in the 1980s. We joked about it and called it tin can archaeology, and it isn't. It is an incredibly rich field. Urban archaeology was just coming to its own in Boston, San Francisco, and New York, as they were finding things in the urban environment, and I picked all of their brains. Public archaeology, I already told you about that. Urban archaeologists do use many volunteers. Shipwreck archaeology was way on the edge of what you should be doing. My friends told me not to do it. I said, well, we'll just try it once. He's got his PhD. He's not a treasure hunter. And it worked out just fine. I told you about the program and about being president. I have no idea. I never thought I would be president. I was busy doing the Veracruz work and writing the seminal work of explaining everything in the early Spanish colonial period here in Pensacola, and when it was interrupted by this. And I will dwell on it a little bit more. One of the things that's important when any of you have started a business that was successful, a practice or a business, you start it on with you. And you are the key to it all. And if something happened to you, it would, in the early stages, the first 10 or 15 years of a business, it's unstable. You have soft funding, you have to keep the money coming in, and if something happens to you and if things don't go just right and you're not there to fix it, it will collapse. And so let me back that up. That's not working. Oh, let's try this way. That's not working. Let's go use the arrow. There. And I thought, well, there are a lot of things that University of West Florida ought to be that I had seen over the years that it wasn't. Our students didn't have a decent student union. Our athletics were in the back of the bus. We're always quality academics. But our previous presidents, who I had figured out how to get to like me, because I learned how to solve their problems with archaeology, the short answer is public relations. The visibility that I gave archaeology, gave it to the university and gave it to the presidents. And the presidents loved it. I was the only one that could ever guarantee that no bad stories, always a success story. And sometimes it wasn't so easy. Here in the city of Pensacola, when people were afraid in the early days, I was going to dig up Pensacola with a teaspoon and was going to get the city council to pay for my research. And I told this story just the other day, and I said, I just had to tell them, let's just do it one project at a time. Just one project at a time. And I'll show you that that's not true. All right, all right. But the point is that there's a time when you need to let go. I had my exit plan. I was going to retire at 65, and at 55 I knew that I needed to plan to develop my exit plan. Then I had to go get the money, and then I had to implement it. And I was about 2/3 of the way through that implementing phase when they asked me to be interim president. And I will tell you that the program is bigger. It is just as strong, in fact it's stronger than it was, and is a very good and comforting thing to me. That the team that is there is good. We're bringing in young blood, not so young blood with John. I started hiring people in their early 40s who were unhappy where they were and wanted this kind of an environment, and I began to seek them out. And so it is a special place, and I knew it. And so I thought, well, maybe now's the time, a few years early, to let it go, because I knew I couldn't do both, to let it go and to see if I couldn't grab the steering wheel of the university and drive it in a direction or to a level that all the previous presidents didn't have the base and didn't have the will to do. What I'm doing at the University of West Florida, other presidents think is very risky. I'm rocking the boat. I am. I'm rocking it. I'm doing all kinds of things. Thank you. You know, you look at those plans and the master plan, it is way out of line, way out of line. And if you're going to go to the next level, you better get ready, because you're going to have to do things you've never done before. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to admit them. You're going to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan F. You're going to have that attitude and be willing to take the criticism, and it stings. But on the other hand, we got football, and that's fun. You know, I mean, things like that. So I have really understood that what I learned to do as an archaeologist and the kind of archaeology that I had done really prepped me quite well for being president and gave me a base for which to operate, a base of support to operate from. And no one else would do it. There's no other professional president that's tall, dark, and silver-haired, that has, $5,000 suits. I don't look like any of them. I don't act like any of them, and I don't want to be them. But that's the kind that we had. That is the expected kind of a president that universities have. But those presidents are safe. They do safe things. They stay a short time before they have to pay the price for their mistakes. Maritime Museum is a good example. We were left with that. We thought it was a bad idea to begin with. It was shaky because it wasn't well funded. The economy collapsed, and it took us years to unwind that and deal with the bad press, but we had to. And now we come back to the Maritime Park, not with a museum, but with the country's most popular sport. So it's strange, but this is a kind of approach, really the approach to archaeology that I took to being president of the university, as I did to archaeology in Pensacola. It served me very well. And I want to wind up on reading, because part of what the Florida Humanities Council wants is reading. I want you to talk about. I want to tell you that my family background is the family farm in Bio George in Panama City in Bay County, and it was a failure. My dad was a dairy farmer. We moved down here from New Jersey when I was 6, and it was just before the crash of the dairy business, when Borden's and pasteurization and all of that took our little milk routes and ruined them, and put milk in the grocery store. Some of you that are older than I remember milk being delivered, and that was one of my first little jobs with my dad, is to run from our milk truck and put it on the step. So at any rate, we still have the farm. It's doing, we still have it, and I've turned it into a hay farm. But the point is that is that my parents were big readers, and they read to me, and they read to my brothers, and reading has always been a part of my life. I had a long bus ride on the school bus every day to and from school, because there was one county school, and we all went to it, and I read and learned about the world through reading. And it is one of the most valuable things that or invaluable things that I learned to do and continue to do. I probably have read thousands of books of all different kinds that teach me things and take me away from the mundane world or the problems that I have. I listen to it in the car now a lot with digital books, and it's a wonderful escape. It's a wonderful transition. When we all have problems and trials and tribulations, and I'll listen to a murder mystery and think, I really have it pretty well. But reading is invaluable, and when I was in high school, I went to the Bay County Public Library a lot, and it was about as big as this room. And there was a librarian named Jane Patton there. And Mrs. Patton, I read everything on archaeology she had. And she kept doing what we now call interlibrary loan. And she would borrow books from other places and give them to me, and I was a voracious reader. And I began to really want to be an archaeologist and understand what history is and what history is not, the fallacies in it, and then the great strengths in it. But reading has always been, it is really the key to understanding the world. It's the key to developing yourself. It's the key to developing everything. I think that libraries are one of the best resources we have in our society. I never thought we'd have such a wonderful Pensacola Public Library. We have our city administrator here, Colleen Castile, who carries the flag now and is going to wrap her arms around it and protect it. It's only been open less than a year, and it's a wonderful thing, and I'm very glad to be a part of it. And it also taught me, as reading, that the past is the key to the present. If you understand what has been, you can appreciate what is, and you can have a better grip on what's to come and be a part of it. And so I think that is very important, and I'm glad that this talk is in the library. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you.